Hello, everybody. So, the story I'm going to tell you today happened when I was 10 years old. Is anybody here 10 years old? Okay, so it was Friday afternoon and I was busy in our house. Daddy was working in his office and we were all in the kitchen and we were making delicious muffins for Sabbath. We were about to put them in the pans. We were all busy doing our chores. And then, boom! There was a big bang. The lights went off. Daddy ran outside of his study and he said, "I think there's a fire. Let me go look." And right by our electric pylon, which is a big thing that holds electric wires, there was a fire. There were flames. So he ran back inside and he said, "There's a fire. Everybody get out." He yelled so loud that my sister thought there was a fire on the roof. And she was really scared. And then we ran, and I got my bear. I have a bear, and he was almost as tall as me, and he had a red nose and a red bow, and I grabbed him, and other people grabbed the bird and the fish, and while all this was happening, Daddy called 911. And then he went back outside to check on the fire, and there was a second fire, even closer to our house. So we ran into our cars, and we pulled the cars out, and we left our property, and we had our bird and our bear and our fish. And Mommy and Daddy said, "We're going to go back." And so they went back, and they had hoses, and they were going to go back on the property to fight the fire. Because the firefighters were coming, but they hadn't come yet. And that scared me a lot, so I began to cry. Well, Mommy called her sister because she wanted her to pray. And finally, after 7 long minutes, while the fire crackled, the firefighters came. Their station was near, but it felt like forever. They sprayed and sprayed and sprayed, and then the bulk of the fire was out. But they had to go to a different fire now, because lightning had struck the pylons in our valley that day, and there were 9 fires. Our neighbors came and helped us to put the rest of the fire out, and there were all sorts of planes and helicopters flying over because there were other fires that they had to spray stuff on. So we had our hose and our buckets, and there was even 10 minutes of rain as an answer to our prayer. Phew, our fire was out. We could cook our muffins and eat them and wash our dirty feet. I would have been really sad if our house burned down. Jesus was really good to save us, and we still have our house. But wait, if he had allowed our house to burn down, would Jesus still be good? Yes, Jesus is always good. Whether things are bad or good, Jesus always cares for us. You may go back to your seats.
Just 1 second. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. Okay, just a second here while I get this set up. Okay, the title of my sermon today is called One Step from Death. Now, I won't divulge too much in what that means until the very, very end. Now, I'd like to start off with a story. Please sit back, close your eyes, relax, and imagine yourself being taken away to a faraway kingdom. You travel past, firstly, a vast wilderness, and in the distance you see a magnificent city soon come into view. Soon you're traveling through the streets, going from the lower class markets to the higher class housing, and then soon you're in gardens with beauty you've never seen before. And finally, you find yourself in the royal courts. A king steps out from his chambers and admires his kingdom. This king was the most powerful king during his reign. He was a proud king, and he stood by everything that he and his father had accomplished. Now one day, this king heard of a rebellion that started in the ranks of his own army. How could he allow that? How could he allow there to be mutiny in his own government that could destroy everything that he had? Quickly, he silenced the offending militia and instituted peace once more in his military. Not too much time had passed since that, and one night while lying in bed, content in his luxurious dwelling, he had a nightmare. A nightmare so fierce it woke him from his sleep. That nightmare brought on itself further distress until he finally learned of what it meant. First, he had a mutiny. Now a dream where to him was prophesied his kingdom would stand no longer? Where could he find this peace to continue to govern his kingdom? Then it struck him. More time passed until one day he was thinking of what he was told by his dream. What if he took that statue that Daniel had told him what it meant, and he made it of pure gold? It would be a symbol of an everlasting kingdom. A strong, powerful, and wealthy kingdom that would see the end of the world. Better yet, he decided he would make the statue the center of a test. A test where he would bring all the people of influence in his kingdom and make them pledge their allegiance to him. At once, he commanded the construction of this magnificent image. With his whole kingdom at his side, the construction was quickly completed and a date for the ceremony was instituted. At this ceremony, he commanded all ranks to bow before the image, an image of himself that towered in that plain. And if some didn't, a fiery death awaited them. At his command, the instruments sounded, and all fell before the statue. All but 3 men. The king was quickly notified of these traitors. When he noticed those 3 men were close friends of Daniel, the man who had interpreted the dream, he was compassionate to give them one more chance. Who knew? Maybe they misheard the command. Maybe since they were from a different country, they didn't understand what he was talking about. Let's give them another shot. But when the king had asked them, they did not mishear. They said they understood everything what it meant. Openly, they stood firm and defied the king's command. For them to obey it would be treason to their king, the one who revealed the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, the one who gave him his power. They told the king that they would not bow down before him, and for them to do so would be worse than death. Those 3 men were sure of their faith, their principles, and by upholding their side, they were sure of being saved from death. But even if they weren't, they were sure. Even if death was imminent, They wouldn't bend before their principals, and they were sure they wouldn't bow before the king. Furious at these traitors and their defiance, he ordered them to be thrown into their fiery doom. Once more, by his rage, their fiery doom was made even stronger and even hotter. But their words instilled a curiosity in his heart. Was their faith enough to save them? Why did they stand up this way? Was there some reasoning to why they stood firm and defied me? Is there a God that was powerful enough to save them from the furnace, that even killed the guards that threw them in? His curiosity grew more and more until he couldn't stand it anymore. He ventured near the furnace, risking his own life to see the outcome of those three men's faith. What he saw blew his mind. Not only were there three men alive, they were walking around, defying all laws of thermodynamics, chemistry, and all other governing laws. And not only did the king see three men, but he also saw another figure, a figure he could only describe as the Son of God. With haste, he told them to come out. Them being alive, not even having the smell of smoke, not having anything charred, nothing burned, they looked just as they had been before when they were thrown in. This amazed the king. A king who had everything he could want, everything he could imagine in his beauty. A king that thought he had seen everything there was to see. He saw something that he could never imagine. In the shadow of that 90-foot solid gold statue, the king declared the God of those three Hebrew men to be all-powerful, and he made a decree instating the importance and glory of him who saved them. But for those three men, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they furthermore strengthened their faith that day and the faith of many, many others. This is a story we have heard time and time before, and is the main story surrounding our theme, but if not. Now, this is an event that happened more than 3 millennia ago. Now you may wonder, why am I saying this? As we know, and some of us have experienced when we're talking to people, our friends, close ones, about God, many of us have encountered a skeptic. Someone who is trying to reason why God doesn't exist, or trying to tell us why God doesn't exist. It is common to find these people. And they may ask, where are these miracles? Where are these miracles we read in the Bible? We see all these great acts, fire raining down from heaven, Red Seas parted. But where do we see that today? They may ask, because of the many deaths of Christians who trusted in their lives in God over the next 2 millennia after Christ's death, why would God allow his people to die? As we know, there have been many deaths by martyrs, people who stood up for their faith. Why did they die? Why would a king with all power imaginable not step forward and defend his subjects? How can we believe and trust so much, down to our very lives, in what we cannot see? Their points give us a lot to think about. If you were asked right now, what would you say? What would be your answer to these questions? Well, I'd say some of their points are correct and some are incorrect. Let's see how we can answer some of their arguments. First, I'd like to start off in the things that they are correct in some points. They're correct in the fact that God isn't as open in his miracles today. With all of today's speculations, theories, and made-up stories, trying to prove God's love with great acts would be difficult and in some case destructive. The problem right now we have is that there are a lot of hoaxes, a lot of things that come up, and if God, I'd say, in my opinion, would try to use those more often, we'd have a lot more difficult time trying to prove it. But people are incorrect in the fact that God doesn't do anything. Phoeditus' life is an amazing example of God working in small ways. Have you heard that name before? But before, I'd like to tell you the testimony of his life. Now, it is amazing what God did for him. But before I do, I have one more question. And how about questions about events that happened more recently? What does God do in our millennia? Does he do anything, or are we left to fend for ourselves? Now, Photitus was a pastor back in 1994 in the country of Rwanda in Africa. During that year, there was a horrible political battle that took the lives of over 1 million people in the course of 3 months. The president of Rwanda was killed in a plane that was shot down. This created a power vacuum and ended multiple peace treaties between two ethnic groups. Politicians, in their anger, pointed the finger at the Tutsis, and they said that they shot down the plane. The Hutus and the Tutsis were the two main ethnic groups back at that time. And the Hutus, fueled with rage from these politicians, slaughtered every Tutsi they could find. It turned into I wouldn't say global, but a large manhunt. Man, woman, young and old, child, all were killed on the spot. Every day the Hutus would go from village to village, killing every Tutsi they could find. This was made easy by the fact that every Rwandan citizen was given an ID card that had their ethnic identity on it. As the days passed, Photitus was getting more and more worried. He and his whole family were Tutsi, and with the ID cards, it would be all too easy for them to be found out and killed. Now, Photitus did have something he could have done. His friends and family urged him to take that ID card that he had and destroy it. And if he was ever asked by someone, hey, where's your ID card? He would say, I lost it. I don't know where it is. I guarantee, hey, I'm Hutu. Trust me here. But would they believe him? Would they be merciful to let him live? Now, he didn't know this, but the Hutus were so enraged by these politicians that they had no mercy. That if he had destroyed his ID card, he would have been killed. Because that's what they did for the rest of the people who tried to hide their identity. And unfortunately, his family didn't listen to him. Photitus knew that it would be a lie for him to destroy his ID card. He stood firm in the commandment that said, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. And he said, no, I will not lie to hide my identity. I will be firm and honest, no matter what consequences follow that. One day, when he was pastoring at a local friend's house, he had invited a lot of his local friends and local people who wanted to come and join his little sermon. And his topic that day was the time of trouble. As he was reading from that chapter in the Great Controversy, he heard a knock at the door. Open up, was their charge. Immediately, he looked out the window and he saw a group of militia with guns, knives, swords, drawn, ready to kill. Without any hesitation, he opened the door and they yelled, ID cards up! Everyone presented their ID cards. Oh, you're a Tutsi, eh? Line up against that wall. The commander took all of the group that were Tutsis and lined them against the wall. But Photitus was having none of it. With his Bible in hand, he openly defied the actions of that commander. In there I may say that I am a Tutsi, but in my heart I am a citizen of heaven. Well, what do you think the commander did? That action made him furious. He took Photitus' Bible, threw it against the wall, and kicked it around. Now, this made Photitus a little bit worried because he had prayed and he was expecting some great miracle to happen. Like, I don't know, maybe they would fall down and die. Maybe they would run away. Maybe they would see an angel and flee for their lives. But God had different plans. He would test Photitus. After all the Tutsis and those who had destroyed their ID cards were sorted through the group, they were ready to slaughter them all. And still, while they were doing this, Photitus was praying. And he was praying. Kill them! But no one could. No matter how they tried, no one could drop their sword on their heads. Finally, the commander had enough of it. He told his troops to retreat, and he would have the police deal with them. As they left, one by one through the door, the last man was so angry at his knife that he took it and threw it at Photius' head. And his aim was impeccable. It hit sharp side down on the top of his scalp. But when Photius reached there to see if there was anything, there was nothing. There was no blood. Not a mark was on his head. Not as much as a paper cut. Now this is the first in many of the miracles that God did in Photius' life. And I strongly recommend you to listen, if you haven't already, to his testimony. And you can hear it. He presented it at the 2018 GYC, and he even wrote a book about it. Now, after this incident, he decided to flee the country. And the miracles that God did were so great, so immense during that time. But I won't spoil too much. I'll leave you to look into that for yourselves. But I'd like to retell you the story a little bit about the end of the genocide in Rwanda. When Photius was younger, he loved the story of Elijah. He admired, because God may just grant you your wish. After that incident, he spent 30 days out in the African bush, hiding out just like Elijah did after Mount Carmel. One day, the Hutus were coming through his area with hunting dogs, and they sniffed. He wasn't worried in the sense like he was hopeless. After the dogs found him, they barked and they announced his location. The Hutus came to him, and instead of cowering in fear, trying to fight them back, instead, he walked up to every single one of them and shook their hand. This caught them off guard because they thought, wait a second, this guy must be a Tutsi. Why else would he be hiding out in the bush? They still did plan to kill him. They planned to kill him right then and there. But as an answer to Photius' prayer, they didn't. They thought, he looks strong. Let him dig his own grave so that we don't have to. They took him to a plot of land and they forced Photius to start digging his grave. Now, Photius was getting a little bit anxious. This wasn't exactly the escape he was hoping for. So he continued to pray for God. He recalled all of the miracles that God did in the Bible. Like again, he prayed for what Elijah had. The amazing miracle at Mount Carmel. He prayed for deliverance like Moses and the Israelites. Even something like David and King Saul. But nothing was happening just yet. As he continued to dig, a soldier noticed what he had like in his little rucksack with him. And he noticed a book. And he asked Photius, hey, can I take a look at that book of yours? Now that book was Photius' Bible. He never left anywhere without it. And he always had it with him. Photius reasoned that, hey, God's going to save me. I might as well give away my Bible. I have no use for it then. So he said, sure, go ahead. And as he continued to dig, that soldier flipped through the Bible and just started reading it. And as he continued to dig, as Photius continued to dig, his prayers starting to increase further. The hole was getting deeper. But not only did his prayers increase, but also did the number of questions from the soldier who was reading his Bible. That soldier felt the need to help Photius dig the grave and went ahead and helped him. That soldier, from his experience and from the answers that Photius was telling him, was having a change of heart. Soon enough, the grave was dug, to the satisfaction of the other soldiers there. Wait a second. We still have that other man to bury. He still has some energy left in him. Let's bury that man in this grave, and then let's have him dig another grave. Photius praised God for buying him more time, but he still wasn't finished praying. He still needed that escape, and he was getting more worried. Even though that soldier had helped him, even though he was asking questions, he still wanted to kill him. That was to what level the Hutus were hunting the Tutsis. They still right then and there wanted to kill him. When they had reached the spot for the second grave, Photius had a rush of courage and asked the soldier if he could have his Bible back to say a few final words. The soldier gave him his Bible and let him speak, and he silenced the other soldiers who were there, who wanted to shut him up. After yet another prayer, God transformed the words that Photius spoke into a sermon, because like he said right then and there, if someone's next to you with a knife, with a gun, forcing you to dig a grave, not much is going to come to your head. But God gave him the words to speak. And not only that, but there was a village nearby, and all the men, women, and children came out to hear what Photius was saying. God placed great words in his mouth. And as Photius finished his sermon, and he finished with his closing prayer, and was just about to continue digging his grave, many started to cry out, "No, no, no! You cannot kill this man." The chief commander heard these pleas and asked the crowd, "Do you allow us to release this man so that his blood is not upon us? He is innocent." "Yes, please let him go. Please let him go," was the crowd's plea. They all knew what danger they put themselves in because they were Hutus. They let go of a Tutsi. What were the other people, the other two Hutus, going to think of them? They were traitors. Well, two of the soldiers thought about it and said, "You know what? Come with us. We're going to take care of you and we'll hide you until the genocide was over." And thus, God spared and saved Photius' life. His testimony and many others shows us that God does still in fact act in our lives. Just like he saved the life of those 3 young men thousands of years ago, he still saves the lives of many people today in our decade. I'd like us to read 1 Kings 19, 11 through 12. 1 Kings 19, 11 through 12. And when you get there, please say a hearty amen. And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after a fire a still small voice." Now I'd like to draw attention to the last phrase. A still small voice. Remember the question I asked earlier about, our skeptic friend who said, God doesn't act like he used to back in the day with these great big miracles. Things that we can notice and just wow our minds. But like this verse says, more often than not, God's actions are a still small voice. That doesn't mean he still doesn't work obvious miracles. But much right now is worked in the heart. Just like the change of heart that soldier had experienced with Photius' testimony to him. Now, God does not force anyone to obey him. We still have the free right of will. But just as the devil whispers temptations in our ears, so does God whisper to our hearts. And we have the choice of whether or not we want to listen or not. I'd like now to turn to Ezekiel 11, 19 through 20. 19 through, let's see. Ezekiel 11, 19 through 20. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh, and I will give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep mine ordinances and do them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Now, who gives us a new heart and takes away our stony heart? God does. God himself says he does it. Unfortunately, like our skeptic friend, many of us do not notice these small changes that God leaves on people because we aren't looking for them. We seek to see these large miracles. And without much doubt, those miracles show God's love and protection. But the greatest miracles are the one that God works on the heart. Now continuing through these questions that our skeptic friend has asked us. I haven't forgotten the question regarding God defending his disciples from death, but I would like to cover that question closer at the end. Now I'd like to return to these two stories. Do we see any similarities between the two of them, between Photitus' life and the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Let's begin with the topic of their faith. Both showed their faith in doing what was right. Now, this phrase, what was doing what was right, is very, very broad. What could have been right in that situation? Could have been, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's case, bowing down once before the statue. They could have done that. They could have bowed before, knowing that they still serve God, and just done that to like, whew, that was a close one. Let me escape death here. But how far can you go with compromises? If you do this one time, if you compromise your faith one time, if you compromise for what you stand for this one time, it'll be easier to do it the next time. And it snowballs to the point where if the king had asked them to do something, fully devote something, they would have much less control to say no right then and there. Or in Photitus' case, what if he had ripped up his ID card? Now, he didn't know that they were killing everyone who didn't have an ID card, but still, he stood true to the commandment that said, do not bear false witness. He did not falter in that aspect either. I'd like to read Matthew 6:24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Both of their examples shows us this. They chose between God or mammon, or in this case, bowing down before the king or lying. Now, these are very difficult decisions that we have to make, but the Bible gives us a promise regarding them. Let's read Ephesians 6:11. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. The Bible is given to us to use in these situations, to know which decision to take and which one to follow through. For these four men, they had complete faith in what the scriptures had said. They trusted what it said, and God saved them for their faith. And they did this more than once. Photitus showed this multiple times in his life, and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, even at their first time when coming to the kingdom, showed their faith in the example of what the king gave them to eat. And then they did the fiery furnace. They were examples of God's character. Now, let's do an overarching question. Why did they believe what God said in the Bible? And in their case, back then, it was the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Why did they have this faith in what a book said? Well, from a young age, Hebrew boys were taught to memorize and obey the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The Torah was their guidebook of all that God had commanded them to do. But again, it wasn't a dictatorship command. It wasn't an authoritarian order. They did it out of trust, and they did it out of love. They trusted in God's great promise. God had a plan from the very beginning of our world to save us from sin. But for him to save us, there must be an agreement, or in other words, a covenant. All that was asked from our side of that agreement was the simple question at Mount Sinai. Let's turn to Exodus 24:3. And Moses came and told all the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord hath said, we will do. God's covenant is with us and has never left us. And God will be faithful to his side as long as we are faithful to our side, obeying the covenant or his 10 commandments, the laws and precepts, everything he has given us in his word. Let's read Deuteronomy 7:9. And please say an amen when you get there. Okay. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Now that we have looked at some things that these 4 men did to be saved by God, let's do a recap of what they did to guarantee they will never die in our physical lives. I'm going to stop right there because this, in fact, is a false question. We cannot guarantee that there are steps, actions, or beliefs that will save us from death. In fact, there is nothing we can do to guarantee life. And the life I'm talking about here is our physical lives, the lives that we're living right now. Let's read James 4:13 through 15. Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city, and continue yet a year, and buy and sell, and get gain. Whereas you know not what shall life be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live, and do this or that. We don't even know what tomorrow has in store for us. As the song the majority of us have sung in Sabbath school goes like this, he's got the whole world in his hands. We don't, but he does. There is a principle in our human character that controls much of what we do. We love to have control. We love to be able to control what happens in our lives, what we get to do, what we don't get to do. And when we lack that control, it can sometimes drive us insane. Some of us feel so much discomfort in that lack of control that we will find drastic measures and go to drastic measures to achieve it. But even if, and even in or without God, we will never find this control. Only he has it, and he knows what is best for us. Let's read Isaiah 5:8 through 11. Isaiah 55:8 through 11. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain cometh down, and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereunto I sent it. Let's also read Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. What does God give us? He gives us an expected end. This is where our faith is to lay. This is where the faith of Photitus and those 3 young men lay. God promised them and us an expected end. We know we have a future life promised to us. But how about those? Let's return back to the question of the skeptic. Why did some people die? Why did so many people in the Dark Ages, why did so many martyrs in the apostolic time die? Why did God allow that? Did they do something wrong? Is there another reason maybe? Is there something we don't know? In fact, there are many reasons why someone couldn't be saved from dying a physical death. But there is a warning here I need to add. We cannot find concrete answers because we do not know why. There is no way we can know why God didn't save them. We can't see their whole lives, their thoughts, and their motives. We don't know the extent of their relationship with God. We don't know their sincerity, but God knows and He judges accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean that every death that happened was because someone disobeyed God. There are times where God does end our lives. Now, I'd like to read a quote from Ellen G. White, and it is located in Counsels on Health, page 375. He knows whether or not those for whom petitions are offered would be able to endure the trial and test that would come upon them if they lived. He knows the end from the beginning. Many will be laid away to sleep before the fiery ordeal of the time of trouble shall come upon the world. The question I came here to answer today was, can we have the same confidence that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have in saying, but if not, to the king? Can we have their confidence? Those 3 young men did not know what was going to happen. They didn't know if they would live or if they would die. But their actions were governed by what God had commanded. A command that was followed by the promise of eternal life. As any of us, they had the fear of death. They were afraid to die. But they had faith in God and His judgment. Let's read Hebrews 10:23. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for He is faithful who has promised. They knew that by standing firm, they would have God on their side. By not faltering, they would show their complete faith to God. I'd like to read one quote. Let me see where it is. From Manuscripts 10, 1885, paragraph 11. Daniel, when told that he must choose between his life and his worship of God, did not hesitate, but 3 times a day, as had been his wont, offered his petition to Jehovah. Death in the lion's den confronted him, And he counted it better to present life. But he counted it better to lose this present life than to lose eternal life. The 3 Hebrew worthies, when told they must either worship the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up or be cast into the fiery furnace, declared, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." They were willing to lose this life, but they could not afford to lose the life to come. We have nothing to fear. We are always one step from death. But that shouldn't be our worry. God has his plan for us. He has given us eternal life and the key to it. And as long as we stay true to his word, he will stay true to his.